Hey everybody, Alex Newman here with the New American, and you guys know that education is close to my heart. It's a passion of mine. I think it's the issue that transcends all the other issues, right? That's why we keep losing on all the other issues, is because our young people are being taught to believe things that are really anti-American and so on. With us today, we have the perfect guest to discuss this. His name is Steve Baldwin, and back in the day when California was not a one-party state, he was actually the chairman of the Education Commission in the state assembly. He was also the executive director for the Council for National Policy, a very prestigious conservative organization. Also, Young Americas for Freedom, and he has been his articles are published in a wide variety of different publications. And he's also written a book on education, from crayons to condoms: the ugly truth about America's public schools. Steve, thank you so much for being with us, and tell us, how did California get into the mess that it is currently in vis-a-vis education?
Well, there's lots of different reasons for it. Demographics are against us. Most of the immigrants that settle in California, the Democrat Party very aggressively went after them. Unfortunately, the Republican Party did not. And it's unfortunate because when you poll the average Hispanic immigrant, they're generally conservative. But then you find out how they vote. They vote Democrat, and our party missed a huge opportunity here to uh, create a whole new generation of Republicans by carrying our banner of freedom and opportunity to all these immigrants who settled in California. And the unions are also extremely strong here in California, and the California Teachers Union dominates politics. You don't get elected in the Democrat Party here in California unless you have union support. They pretty much run the legislature. I can't tell you how many times I witnessed the Democrats on my committee when I chaired the education committee would come in late. And I was wondering, well, where are they? Where are they going? And they would all file into a little room off the side and meet with the union leaders. And the unions would sit there and tell them, would actually pass out little cheat sheets to them. Here's how you vote. You vote yes on this, vote no on that. And then they'd all file into the official hearing room and vote accordingly. So the unions were basically run. I mean, we could abolish the legislature in California today and just allow the unions to run the state, and nothing would be different. Okay, you probably save a lot of taxpayer money that way. Who knows? Uh, but it's kind of sad that this is no longer a representative democracy. We have private groups that pretty much dictate education policy, and for that matter, lots of other policies in California. So there's that issue. And in California too, we have centralized education to the point where there is no such thing as local control of our schools. That's disappeared. We have 26 different state agencies that govern education in California, from the kind of textbooks you select, to the teacher pension plan, to the teacher credentials, to the lesson plans that must be incorporated. I mean, I tell conservatives it's really not even worth running for school board anymore in California because you don't really have any leverage on anything. Um, you're just sitting there voting for mandates that are heaped upon you, and you have no control. So the centralization of power has destroyed the concept of local control of our schools, which was an historic concept that most states treasure as one of the key institutional foundations of public schooling in the United States. So that's gone in California, and I'm pretty much sure that other states are following suit and centralizing education policy, not only in their state capitals, but in the federal government as well. We all remember Goals 2000 and Race to the Top, centralized programs under both Republican and Democrat administrations that took a lot of power away from our schools and centralized it in a handful of bureaucrats, the Department of Education in Washington. So unfortunately, we don't have local control. Parental input means very little today. So parents have hardly any leverage at all in our schools today. And I really do think that public school system, it's a lost cause for us conservatives, and that we should be champion various forms of educational choice. That's where we should put our effort at this point.
Yeah, so much to unpack there, and it's very true. You know, the idea that the children in San Francisco, that the community in San Francisco would want the same thing as people up in Northern California and in Shasta County. It's self-evidently silly, and yet now we have this pretty much nationally standardized system. So one of the things that's come to the fore in California that I think you guys are a little bit further advanced than most of the rest of the country is the critical race theory. You just
Yeah.
had the new ethnic studies model curriculum where the elementary school children should chant to the Aztec deities of cannibalism and human sacrifice and ask them for help for becoming a social justice warrior. So, what's going on with this in the public school system? What do you think the purpose is? What's going to happen to these children as they grow up and get out into the world with these ideas?
Well, my sister-in-law, my brother's sister, is actually on a committee of her school district right now to adopt a critical race theory program. And like most of these programs, the general theme is that whites are basically racist, and you must prove that you're not. And they're horribly divisive, anti-American, and frankly racist. And I think the only way we're going to fight this is not through the democratic process, but through the courts. These programs are being adopted up and down the state, and our bureaucrats in Sacramento are pushing a series of model programs for schools to adopt, but all of them are horrible. And the 1964 Civil Rights Act is very clear that you cannot use government funds to discriminate against any race in America. It doesn't matter what race. And so there are lawsuits I've heard of, and in several different school districts in California. And we're going to have to fight this one, at least in California, in the legal system to prevail, I'm afraid.
Yeah, and we're gonna have to go to a break in just a few minutes here. But when we get back from that, I want to talk about some of the solutions that we can use. But so I was just looking at the education rankings. It looks like California is ranked 40th in the nation, and I know these rankings aren't all that reliable. And when some of the things they calculate is how much money is wasted on it, as if wasting more money on it made it a better education system. But when you look at America's government schools and compare them even to government schools in other countries, it paints a pretty grim picture. Where do you think we're headed with this?
Well, you're absolutely right about money. I actually did a study when I was in the state assembly of every state, how much they spent per student. And I found the unusual situation where the more money a state spent, the more likely they were near the bottom. And the states that the states that spent the fewest amount of dollars per student, like Utah, were among the best performing states in America. So the relationship between quality of education and dollars spent is really not there. And in Europe, believe it or not, they have educational choice all throughout France and Germany, Spain, Italy. Most of those European countries, very few people know this, but most of those European countries have had a form of European educational choice for 60, 70 years, where a parent can go to a private school without being financially punished, and the money follows them. And that, frankly, has created a little bit of competition between public and private systems, and is why European students are actually outperforming American students in the areas that were often compared with math and science are the only areas that there's international performance tests done. Um, so America should be near the top of the world given our economic strength and our heritage, but unfortunately, it's near the bottom of the industrialized world in education. And as a result, you see all these companies trying to hire foreign workers all the time, and they tell me, well, it's not just that they're cheaper, Steve, but in many cases we hire them to be programmers because they know more about a lot of things than American students do. So
Yeah.
we're going to see that trend unless we do something to change education in the United States, because right now we are not competing with the rest of the world.
Yeah, it is. It's an incredible situation that we're in. And so we're going to go to a break in just a moment, folks. When we get back, we're going to talk with Steve about possible solutions and where we might go from here. Again, we're with Steve Baldwin. He was the chairman of the Education Committee in the California State Legislature. He's the author of a book. And we will be back right on the other side of this break with a whole lot more. Stay with us. Hey everybody, Alex Newman here again with the New American. Thank you for staying with us over the break. We are with Steve Baldwin. He is an incredible person who's been dealing with the education issue for many decades. In fact, since I was a little child, if not before. And he was the chairman of the Education Committee in the California Assembly. He also wrote a book on education, and he's been in the thick of it for a long time. Before we went to break, we talked a lot about the problems, the critical race theory, the fact that our children are getting dumber and dumber. American employers are now going overseas to try to find employees because they know more. Um, and so one of the options that he mentioned to try to bring about some reform is to break the monopoly. Historically, monopolies have always performed poorly. And some of the European countries have developed the system of school choice. So, Steve, I want to throw a curveball at you. I was living in Sweden. My wife is from there. I wouldn't have gone there on purpose, but they had this school choice thing where the government would pay if you wanted to go to a private school. And then in 2011, 2012. The parliament passed a new education reform, and they said, "Hey, all these schools, all these private schools that are taking government money, now they've all got to teach the government curriculum. They've all got to use the government tests. We can't have any more prayers. We can't have any more Bible. Oh, and by the way, we're banning homeschooling, so there is now no escape." How do we prevent something like that from happening in America or in our states if and when the school choice, the taxpayer money spigots open up?
Well, a couple things. And you're right, that always has been a problem with voucher bills across the country. And we conservatives and libertarians have always worried about that. And that is once uh, government monies flow to private entities, what's to stop them from regulating them further? And there have been some model voucher legislation in a couple states where they included in the legislation a provision that makes it difficult to add on any further regulations on the private sector. They One bill I remember required 2/3 vote of the legislature to add any new regulations. You could make it different. The other thing is you could just go to tax credits, which is a slightly different model of education choice, whereby parents are allowed to write off on their taxes all their expenses for homeschools or private school tuition. And that is probably a little bit better in terms of protecting you from this type of government abuse because you're removed a little bit further from the government control with writing off on your taxes as opposed to direct subsidies. So,
Mhm.
uh, but yeah, I mean it's a concern, and we have to be aware of that as we go down the road in promoting these kinds of options.
Yeah, and so the little bit that we've looked into this, we've seen that a lot of states do have these tax credit programs where basically the money never goes to the government; it just goes direct into a foundation or direct to a school. And then, like
Right.
in Illinois, we just had a meeting yesterday with some people up there, and they said that you're allowed to write off 75%, not like with the federal where you just kind of deduct it from your income. Here, you're actually, if you owed the state $1,000 and you donate $1,000 instead to a government school, you can write off 750 and you just pay the state 250. And we were told that that kind of provides a layer of protection. More
Yeah.
broadly speaking, Steve, beyond just the mechanics of this, what should an education look like? And what would it look like if we had more competition? I mean, where would schools go? What do you think parents would choose for their children? What would our school system look like if we got rid of this rigid, one size fits all government bureaucracy and allowed some more choice and allowed some more market to function?
Well, I think you have an explosion of new school construction and creation by churches, by private foundations, by foundations that are dedicated to helping the inner city areas. I mean, I spent years talking to people in the private school movement and asked them if we had an educational choice framework, either tax credits or voucher, do you intend to build more schools? And every one of them said, absolutely. So the market would drive that. You would have thousands and thousands of parents seeking these alternatives. And as a result, you would see a flood of new schools created all over the country. And some would be specialized. Some would say, we want to specialize towards, we're for special ed students, or we're for musically inclined, or we're for math inclined, or engineering inclined. You would have all kinds of different niches formed and filled by the private sector. That's what the private sector is best at, filling the needs of consumers. And we have seen this model happen in Wisconsin, for example, where you have a fairly large educational choice experiment going on there. And the public schools suddenly improved. My goodness, it's called competition, duh. And they worrying about losing their bodies because, public schools are funded by ADA, average daily attendance. And every body that leaves the public schools, the private schools, they lose money. And suddenly they start upping their game. So choice does improve public schools. And we need to acknowledge that. And I think we have an opportunity here to form an alliance with minority legislators. And in many states, we got education choice passed because the conservatives formed an alliance with Democrats representing inner city areas who know better than anyone that the public schools are destroyed, they're defunct practically. And we've been able to push through some pretty radical education reform bills, education choice bills, as a result of that unlikely alliance. So we're seeing it happen right now. Just in the last couple of years, we're seeing education choice of one variety or another pass in about a dozen states here in California in the last couple of years. I mean, throughout America, just in the last 2 years. So it is happening. It's been a movement that's been around for 30, 40 years, but it seems to be currently accelerating today. So I'm happy to see that.
Yeah, absolutely. And Steve, what happens if we do nothing? What if we just continue throwing more money at the public school system and feeding more and more children into the public school system? Where does America go from here?
I think we'll lose control of the country. I think the
Mm,
left understands that the public school system as it exists today, is their way of creating future generations of students who will accept a socialist country, which is the path we're heading down as we speak. And they need to create a obedient, compliant generation of students who accept that the government is in charge of our lives and our destiny and our dreams. And they are creating students that are thinking just like that, and they're being successful. Um, if you told me 20 years ago that we would pursue socialism and all these different fronts as we're doing now, I would have thought you're crazy. And here we are. And it's because I think of the success of the Democrats using our public school system as their personal propaganda machine. And that will increase unless we break that stranglehold.
yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, Steve. And so, in the last couple of minutes we have left here, what should an average parent do? What should an average citizen? Maybe they don't have children. What should an average taxpayer do? What do people do who are concerned about this? Who maybe they're not legislators, they don't have a big platform. What does a person do?
Well, I think to increase education choices, there are things parents can do. If you are a conservative and you attend a church and your church is not operating a school, you should put together a team of parents and meet with the church leadership and find out how can we do this. And if your church is small, then you team up with 3, 4 other churches of like-minded churches in the area and go in together on forming a school. Because you think about a church, it's empty Monday through Friday. We're paying all this money, churches are paying all this money to maintain these empty buildings Monday through Friday, utilities and so forth. And most churches have people who are capable of teaching. A lot of retired teachers and other people who were former engineers or whatever. Most churches have people who can actually serve as teachers. And so churches are ideal. And yet only a small fraction of churches in America now sponsor a school. That should change. Every church, particularly the conservative churches, should be involved with creating a private school, if not by themselves, then in partnership with a couple other like-minded churches. That's for starters. I mean, any parent can get involved with that.
Steve, we've
And
only
then
got a couple seconds left, but I just want to thank you for coming on, folks. Steve Baldwin, the former chairman of the California Education Committee in the Assembly. Thanks again, folks, for listening. God bless you all.